All right. Thank you, Andy, for the introduction. So for anyone that doesn't know me as of yet, I'm the guy that lost his hotel card at the. I wish they would just put GPS on those things just to get rid of the problem. Anyway, pretty pleased to be here and get a chance to give you our view of HTML5 and the possibilities offered by that technology. So I have a lot of things to share and discuss in my presentation. So I'm going to try to go through each of the items. So I just want to do a short introduction. This is my presentation canvas. I'm going to talk about HTML5, what are the benefits. I'm going to go through quite a few examples of web publishing, that takes some of those styles, some of those options. We'll also look at the business side, which is a key thing. At the end of the day, some people are making decisions based on that stuff. All right, so let's get into the meat of it. So why going HTML5? Why is this important today? Well, everyone, I'm sure, in this room has a cell phone. Mobility is a must nowadays. And really, HTML5 gives us the ability to reach people either mobile or desktop. And, if you look at it at the nitty-gritty side of things, there's great rendering options, great capabilities to, overlay all sorts of information. But still, the challenge is to design the map so that it is usable, it is simple to use for the end user. And that's a challenge, obviously, depending on what you're using. And there's always some challenges. When it comes to business users, this is where there's key metrics. One of the first key metric is the time it takes to render a map. I'm sure a lot of you have been using web services. You mentioned the time it takes to load a map, or having that responsiveness is key. If you want to use maps for decision making, it has to be fast, it has to be reliable, it has to be displaying quite fast. So another aspect is people are also looking for getting a summary of what's going on. Down to the nitty-gritty details, zoom in really close. So a close view and having that overview of data is really key. Another aspect that we found that is critical is people nowadays expect a self-service. They want to work with the map, they want to change the style, they want to modify the map on demand. They don't want to go back to their GIS guide to reproduce a map necessarily. So there's a self-service aspect that's really involved and important in the industry. Something else that we found is having access to external live data can be a huge benefit and a huge competitive advantage. So those are the key points that we think are quite important when it comes to web mapping. Now, how do we deliver faster maps and client-side and potentially a better experience? I think a lot of you will agree that vector data is really giving us the ability to have something that is much more reactive. So in our case, what we're using really clever vector data, a lot of spatial indexing on the client side to deliver what we think is a rich user experience. Now, on the data side, we're using essentially JSON and XML. You could see it in the figure displayed right now. We have a separation of the geography from the data. And that intelligent data binding gives us the ability to bring in all sorts of relational data without duplicating the same layer. So we can do really interesting data binding. And obviously the base map, we didn't reinvent the wheel. We're using raster PNG, or we could use vector as well. So let's go through some examples and maybe some of the things we can do with web publishing and styling in HTML5. I'm sure a lot of you are working with Photoshop or graphic programs, very popular. Well, with HTML5, we can do pretty cool things. We could have different layers. We can play with blend modes so that we see through the layers. We could play with drop shadow, glows effects, and things like that. So let's take a look at a real example that does that. So here we go. So this is a typical example, typical map that has basically 3 layers. I have my tiles in the background, I have my polygon, and my points. Each of them are essentially working together. So as you can see, the first thing I can do, when I'm navigating in this map, start that thing again. First thing we do whenever we roll over the map, you can see we have some data tips are being displayed as well as some drop shadow effects. The vector aspect of the data really gives us those capabilities. In addition to this, I can turn on effects like in this case an inner glow effect that you would get in a program like Photoshop. I can also add more than one effect. I can decide to add something, in this case, like a drop shadow. like each of the rollover are still working. When I add a drop shadow, I can even configure, for instance, the size of the drop shadow. So the canvas really gives us a lot of powerful tools to create really interesting renderings. You can see as well, we sort of like see through the layers. The multiply and the blend mode support gives us the ability to see the tiles and see the underlying data. All right, so how does this look in a real map? We've decided, since it's Canada's birthday this year, to present a national map. This is actually an expedition that is happening in Canada right now, covering the 3 coasts. So from Canada, C3, the 3 different coasts of Canada. So it's going from the Atlantic Canada, as you can see, it's starting in Toronto, and traveling pretty much all around the country from the Atlantic to the north to the Pacific. Now, this is a map publication we did. You can see some of the colors that we used to design, and the projection in this case is Lambert conformal conic. Now, we have a bunch of interactive layers. Obviously, we show some of the stops, but people, as they were getting onto that trip, needed to fly to those remote locations so they can get on the leg. So we can turn on that particular layer showing all the different routes. But what's interesting is you can start looking at the different legs. You can turn on different layers. Those layers are essentially vector overlays on top of the tiles. You can click on specific stops along the way, look at the data. You notice as well, whenever we roll over a feature, we have a nice drop shadow effect that really outlines the feature. That's the kind of stuff, the kind of user experience people expect nowadays when you're publishing a web map. And it's an interesting way to present the data. So you can travel, you can see along the way all the different things, and you can turn on layers of interest. And this is where we can have an overlay like this, polygonal overlay, and some rollover, so that whenever you roll over the map, the user has information about what's there. You can travel across the country and finish your trip in British Columbia. You notice we have a GPS trace of the boat showing in here. It's currently somewhere in BC, and it's going to finish the trip back to Victoria. So anyway, interesting expedition. I didn't get to go, but maybe next time, if we have another birthday sometime, we'll see. All right, moving on to a different map, maybe a little bit more detailed in this case. This is the district where I live, actually, in the Ottawa area. So we've been using some of the filter effects. You could see now this is focusing really on that district itself. We have a nice outer glow effect, so we wanted to filter out the rest of the district in the city to really focus on that area. So we found that that was an interesting way to showcase the possibilities. You notice the points on the map, they actually represent different projects and enhancements that have been going on. Notice some of the cartography. We've been using the OpenStreetMap data that we restyled in this case, just to make it fit, and we didn't want the base map to take too much precedence. We want to focus on the points, and the design is to make that easy for the citizen to find information. You can look at the status. We designed the interface as well to be fairly simple, with just a drop-down menu where you can pick your theme of interest, looking at parks, whatever may be of interest. It could be schools, whether the schools, the basins, and the districts of each of the school. But more importantly, people are interested in, what projects are going on, what sort of streets have been constructed in the last few years, and also what are the big projects, what's coming up. So here's an example of a huge project where there's a lot of changes in that area. And most of the citizens are really curious to find out about things that happened in the past, when were buildings constructed close to the site, and having those rollovers, those capability to look at even the number of floors and all those things is quite useful. But more importantly, looking at the zoning information, and whoever creates those zoning polygons, they're crazy. Some of them could be so complicated. And having the rollover effect and the drop shadow really helps the user understand the geography, because it's a complex thing to show. I mean, you can see in this map, pretty much all the zones have the same color. It's all the same zoning, but having those rollover effects helps understanding the data. All right, so moving on. next demo, I want to talk about more business information. This is where we get into business uses and demographic data analysis. This is where a dashboard like what I'm showing right now is making more sense. This is where we have typical choropleth map. In this case, we're looking at the young adults ratio. You can see we have a nice dashboard view and the ability to pick your theme of interest. When you do, the whole interface changes and the whole map changes. The colors are changing everywhere. You can see we have some rollover, which essentially shows the current data being displayed. What's interesting is you can pick your theme of interest very quickly. The data's been downloaded to the client. Now, that's why it's so fast. You want to really deliver something that's spiffy and that really works fast in the browser. In this map, what we're doing and what we're displaying right now is simply two layers. There's the base map, which is tiles, and the vectors, which are being displayed on top of the map. Now, we wanted to leave the capability for the user to also customize the theme. So you can actually pick the variable of interest, let's say people from 40 to 49 years old, pick your method to represent that data, in this case, graduated symbol, and then you could see and visualize that additional indicator on top of the map. You can also customize that very easily by just going in, using a slider to change the colors. So all of those changes are happening very quickly in your browser, and you can customize the view. One thing that's really important and that's key is the ability also to understand the relationship in the data, and having, as you can see, mouse over in the legend and showing, highlighting everywhere in the desktop as well, the table view in the chart and on the map at the same time, is what we were after when we designed our software. We really wanted to create that immersive user experience so that people can bring in data. Now, you notice the table below the map is extremely useful to look at all the numbers, but you can also use it to navigate, click on a feature, and most of our users also use it like Excel to essentially add columns, and also probably one of the most advanced feature is the ability to filter and sort. So for instance, I can decide to go in and filter the average annual income, let's say greater than 50,000. When you do that, you reduce the number of polygons on the map, and all of a sudden we have only so many polygons being displayed. And you're not limited to a single item. You can start filtering using multiple criteria. So you can really target different people or different areas in your geography. So in this case, I'm combining the number of people with a college diploma. You notice that right now the data is filtered. There's only 40 polygon areas being displayed. And when I choose different themes, I can still look at the same set of filtered data, but with different views. Now, that has been quite useful for anybody that's doing geomarketing or wants to study target specific areas. You're not limited to a single layer. Obviously, we're adding, in this case, clients. And these clients could be shaded as well. And it actually becomes interesting when you start studying where your customers are in relationship to those areas. We have a classification of those customers right now, whether they're public, retired, or self-employed. And we can filter them so we can get rid of the students. No students in the room, so we're doing okay there. We can get them out. The next step then after you filtered the data is how can we put that in relationship with my polygon layer? Obviously, maybe I want to select all the clients that fall within those neighborhood areas. So we can do spatial query by simply doing a spatial intersection. So I can click on a region, and it actually puts those two layers in relationship and provides me with the list. Then what you can do easily is download the list in Excel. So a lot of business users are still using Excel, believe it or not. It's still convenient. It's still, a lot of data is in Excel. The next step, very often, when you have an opportunity for businesses, what happens is you want to identify it. Maybe you want to mark the map, you want to add a comment, something you want to annotate the map. So we've got tools to enable that quite easily. So you can draw your text, you can add lines, polygons, you can even style your comments and the things you add on the map just by drawing an arrow or something. So fairly simple and straightforward way to just annotate the map and create something that potentially you may want to share with your colleague. A lot of people are still printing the map, so the next step is maybe you want to share it on the web, or maybe you just want to print it. There's the print menu you can go to. And then even then, you could still zoom in, zoom out on the map. It's a real functional map. You can also move the map if you don't like it in terms of its location. You can take the title, change it, all of the items are available for you to manipulate. And that's the advantage of working with HTML5 is all those components can be put together and they can all work right there in your browser without having to worry too much about the support. All right, next demo I want to show is more about, we've looked at opportunities, let's look at a business problem. So quickly here, this is all about, in this case, mortgage delinquencies and payments. So people that really didn't pay their mortgages in Ireland. So you could see they're represented on the map right now with points. We can first of all look at the density with a heat map. That heat map can be changed on the fly, so I can change the radius of the heat map, typical classic heat map. But also, as I'm zooming in, you can see that the radius changes, but you can make it fixed by a specific distance, and then you can change it, and then, obviously it stays constant as you zoom in. But what's more important is not necessarily look at density, but also look at what type of delinquency. Is this the first time that this is happening? Is this something recurrent? This is where you get into the details, as you can see, and you can start exploring with a dashboard like this, all sorts of aspects. What type of apartment is it? Is this a house? What is it? And really the pie chart and the interaction and the highlighting of all the features working together in the browser, extremely useful. Something else that's of high interest, I just turned on right now the clustering. You noticed before that the points were all scattered around. We didn't really have a good sense of how many points were where. With having the ability to do that and turn on the clustering is extremely useful to start having a better sense of what's going on in that area. Each of those objects can be selected. As when we do that, obviously the chart is responding to the events. So all of that is event-driven, and having the ability to turn on or off different themes, as we can see now, right now, looking at different problems. If you have data that is actually a measure, in this case, we have severity of the problem. You can see that the pie chart is changed right now to a histogram. Notice as well, as I'm zooming in, that we show some of the labels. And now, obviously, that histogram is still working pretty much as the rest of the components. All right, I'm going to skip the rest of that one because there's a little bit more I want to show. Here's another example of a project we did I talked about live data. That's key for people that are doing trading. This is actually a project we did with a pretty big energy company in Canada. They're trading in the US market, and for them it was really key to have live information and connected data. So let's go through that quickly. So this is a data wall that's essentially 40 feet wide by 10 feet high. The trading floor is using this application on demand. When there's a change in the market, some of those areas are actually changing color. These guys are getting on the phone, doing a phone call to do trading. And the key thing we're doing in this case is we are using WebSockets to update the polygon data. Since there's a separation of the vector data from the back end, we can actually push changes to the map on the fly. And that has proven to be extremely useful in those cases, because these guys need to make a business decision on the fly. All right. I'm going to skip the tools. Well, I'm going to do that one really, really quick. So we have tools. Obviously, we've got the publisher, which can take your GIS data, bring it in. That's how essentially we've created all those maps. But I want to finish off by doing an interesting demo of animated map, right? It has to be a nice way to finish the presentation. So I want to talk about our SDK and some of the animation capability. So this is a full map of CartoVista running right now. All the previous ones were videos, but this is a full map right now running. So we thought, hey, let's see what we can do in terms of animation. So let's start by adding my wife on the map. She's right there. You can see that pink point. And I threw in a GPS in her purse and see, hey, can we start following her? Of course we can. There we go. She's going on the highway. And guess what? She's going from one shopping center to another. That's a typical journey. My wife, she likes to spend things. Could have watched her credit card as well. That would have been a good way to follow her. As you can see, she's traveling across, going back home. Nice journey. But the interesting part is to see now with the blue color what my son does. Well, he does pretty much the same, goes home. He actually works for CartoVista, so he goes to the office. Afterwards, he's still studying, goes back to school, he's gonna do his thing. And like pretty much most of us Canadian will end up his day at the hockey rink, where he's gonna play. Pretty typical journey. And then we said, hey, let's push the boundary, let's go further and see how about we map pretty much all the employees in the company. So we said, hey, let's see what their journey is coming from their home to the office. And the first time people saw this, they thought that this sperm sort of like distribution map was kind of crazy. But anyway, sometimes you need crazy ideas. But the interesting part, as you notice, everyone came into the office at the same time. I can tell you this never happens. The last thing that we did based on this kind of animation is at our launch event, we decided to ask the people that came in their postal code, where they live and where they work. And we used this data to sort of like create an animation that shows their transit that morning. And as you can see, there's quite a few points moving in the map, but it was a really nice way for us to show how you can actually overlay, and you can see the difference between ladies driving and guys driving. They're pretty much driving all like crazy right now. But that was a great idea of what was possible with our SDK. Anyway, I want to thank you for your attention and your time. This is great, and thank you so much.